Welcome back to HMBA 614, Health Services Management. I'm your professor, Professor Roberts. And, it's week 5. We're over the hump. We're in the downward trend here towards the end of class. I mean, if you're thinking of a bell curve or something like that, or over the hill, or whatever phrasing you would like to use. And we're on the way. You guys can probably already start thinking of graduation, or at least getting out of this class. I mean, I know when I was going through my courses, I kind of anticipated, being successful and moving on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And hopefully you guys are thinking about the future. But, we're going to do a little recap of the reading that's going on this week. Now, for some of you, you might not have done the reading yet, so this isn't a recap. This might be kind of like a preview. But I'm hoping you've accomplished the reading. And, maybe I'll talk about something that maybe you missed in the reading, because I know every time I read a book, I always miss things. And it's always helpful to have that, like a review, or maybe read it again, or read a different version. Like if you read the book, listen to the audiobook. So I guess you can consider this a little bit like the Cliff Notes audio version. Do they even have Cliff Notes anymore? I know they were big when I was at school. But anyway, we're going to talk about Chapter 9, which is Risk. Chapter 10, Contracting and Procurement. This is my favorite area, being a supply chain guy. And then the project closeout in Chapter 11. We have to close a project properly. And then I'll talk a little bit about Paper 3. Your first 2 papers were great. I'm in the middle of grading Part 1 of your project portfolio. And I like what I'm seeing so far, and hope to have that all done grading in the next day or 2. So, let's move on. Chapter 9, Risk. Risk is something that we have all around us. If you're just driving to work in the morning is risky. You don't know what the other drivers are going to do. You don't know if your vehicle is going to be fully functional as it should be, or the level you maintain it at. Something can break. I mean, you can break down, could have a flat tire. So risk is really just a potential of something happening, whether it's good or bad. I mean, we can have risk that something good's going to happen, right? Like I hope, my risk of winning the lottery works out when I do play. I don't even play until it's pretty close to $1 billion is the prize money. Because you know what? You walk away with about half or a little less than half after taxes. So, yeah, I could take that positive risk. But then again, I'm just hoping to break even on my money, or maybe make a couple dollars when I do play. That's me. I'm willing to potentially lose that $10, $20 for the potential to have the greater reward of that risk. So, risk versus reward. So often when people are talking about risk, they're talking about the negative aspect. What are the odds that you fail, or what are the odds that something negative will happen? It happens all the time. And usually that's how people think of it, because most people tend to be pessimist or cautious when it comes to this stuff. So, I mean, other than the board game Risk, which I'm hoping everybody has played, it's not a bad game. It just takes forever to win the entire world domination there. But we will take on risk because we might see the rewards or the benefit that we'll get from that risk is outweighing the potential downside. For example, going in for heart surgery. Yes, the patient might not have a successful outcome of that surgery, but if they do nothing, their odds of having a negative outcome is huge. So many patients will choose to do the surgery because the potential reward outweighs the risk. Since we're in a healthcare type class, talking about that in that mindset might be beneficial. You could also look at, let's say, medical drug trials. Somebody could be, taking the trial drug, and they might get the placebo, which does nothing for them, but then they could take the drug, and there could be some adverse reactions, or it could be, life-saving for the people that qualified for the study. So we have to look at that in a sense of project management. Usually the risk is project failure or project challenges and a risk of the money that we're spending. Um, if but then there's certain things that we won't make the decision to do. Like if a decision will risk in a project will risk human life, that is not something that we find acceptable, at least in projects I've done. But in the military, to take an objective, there's an acceptable risk of potential loss of life in trying to take that objective. Every branch has their own percentages that they find acceptable, and generally they don't say what it is, but it varies. But the reward could be worth it. I mean, think about the Normandy invasion during World War II. So many people invaded the beaches off the water. That was a huge risk, but in the end, it was worth it. So that's kind of the grand scale of things, but risking money is generally not that risky because there's a chance you could make the money back or make up for it. Let's say how you do your project, you can gamble with a little bit of money by taking a risk, and if it fails, well, you might be able to make up for it somewhere else in your project. But we usually will come up with a huge list of potential risks. So depending on the project, you're going to make a list of what possibly could go wrong. And then after you've done this brainstorming session, you start to look at the probability of them happening. So we call this the risk probability matrix. So we're looking at the likelihood that it's going to happen and the severity of the impact of it happening if it does happen. So usually the likelihood of it happening, we have not at all the way up to essentially 100 are certain that it's going to happen. On the severity, there's no impact or minimal, all the way up to severe impact. So if you're doing a project outside, let's say you're a construction company putting something up, weather is probably something that you're going to consider as a risk, especially if you're just doing something like, let's say, concrete. Concrete doesn't like snow, let's say. So if it snows, you might have to wait a day or two to address this risk. Is it a severe risk? Is it severely going to impact the project? Probably not. But it's at least, let's just say minor risk that it might snow and delay the project, or rain. But you can look at these and say, well, it's the summer. What are the odds that it's going to snow in the middle of summer? Well, pretty low, probably 0 to maybe 1%. That act of God or fluke of nature might happen, and it snows in the middle of July or August. But if it does snow in that time frame, how is that impact going to affect the project? Well, usually during the summer it's pretty hot, so that snow is going to melt really quickly. So it probably won't have a long-running impact. But then again, we look at every risk that we've identified along these lines, and we can plot them on a chart based on the severity, where the intersection of where the likelihood of it happening and the severity of its impact. And after that, we look at tolerance, because we're going to make plans for most of these things that we've identified. But what is our level of tolerance? So if we're looking at the more severe and more likely to happen risks that in the project, we're going to come up with plans for those, certainly, or at least have general ideas of how we're going to address those. But when it comes down to, let's say, the middle range, well, are we going to go ahead and make plans for those? Are we going to accept that risk might happen and then we'll deal with it then? Where's our tolerance? Or are we not tolerant of that and we're making plans for those middle range items, and when we get down to the low range, we're not making plans for those because they're so minimal impact and they're very unlikely to happen? Like raining fish. Is it going to happen in the middle of Morgantown or wherever you're located? It's very unlikely that it's going to rain fish. It's been known to happen, We have documentation. Let's see. Let's see. The Bible has it, and then we have some actual video of fish falling from the sky in various countries around the world. And scientists have been able to explain that. But the odds of that happening in your location could be so minimal or so unlikely that you don't make a plan, because it's something, if it happens, you'll deal with it when it happens. So, but we all have our risk tolerance. If you think of your investments in the stock market or in mutual funds or bonds or whatnot, you have your tolerance of how risky you want to invest in things. Or if you're a surgeon, you might have a certain threshold of, okay, this is too risky, I'm not going to do it. Or, oh, this is not a problem, I could do this in the office kind of thing. We all have our risk tolerance. So when it comes down to it, we have essentially 3 categories of risks. The known risks, like we know it's going to rain, we know it's going to snow, we know it's going to be sunny, and we know about what time of the year those are more likely to happen. So we know these are known knowns. But then we have known unknowns. So, for example, we know about tornadoes, but has Morgantown, the city of Morgantown, West Virginia, where the university is located, has there ever been a tornado in the city or even the county where the university is located? We don't know the type of impact that would have, but we know that there's such things as tornadoes. A number of years ago, there was a hurricane that went all the way up to New Jersey. I mean, they know about hurricanes. Everybody, or most people in the United States, know about hurricanes, but they had no idea the impact that it could have done all the way up into New Jersey. So that kind of set them back. They were panicking because they didn't realize how much water and wind damage and all the other stuff that comes with a hurricane. But it's something that they really didn't know how to address or make a plan. Yes, they could have consulted with, let's say, Florida, who gets hit with them all the time. How do you plan for a hurricane? Yeah, they could have done that, but the likelihood of a hurricane getting all the way up to New Jersey is so remote that no one ever thought it would happen. But it happened a few years ago. Then we have the unknown unknowns. These we have no idea that are out there that are risks, and we don't know what their impact's going to be. Let's say aliens landing on Earth and saying, "Take me to your leader." Some of you might be cautious about taking an alien race to our current leader in the White House. Others might be like, "This way, please." That's a political thing. We try to stay out of politics here. But what would we do? I'm sure the military has plans. I'm sure NATO has plans and the United Nations has plans, but we don't know what would happen if that was to happen. How would we react? So there's a lot of things we don't know about. I mean, that's just going the extreme, like alien invasion or alien visitation or whatever. But think about your specialty or your area of expertise. What are some things that could happen that you have never heard of happening, and you don't know how that would actually impact you or impact your job? So all of this leads us to these mitigation plans. We're going to make plans on how to address the risks as they're brought up. So, snow falling when we're trying to pour the footers for a building. Okay, well, do we just wait a day or two for the snow to melt, or do we actually bring out some heat sources and melt the snow so we can actually do the work? We can come up with a plan. Or we make a plan, we continuously look at the weather forecast and we try to get it all done before it snows. And just make sure it's covered so it doesn't, the snow doesn't impact the cement or concrete. We can come up with plans that address this stuff. The plans can be very elaborate, or they can be very minimal, just saying, hey, do this. Well, that's a plan. You've thought about what the risk is, and you've tried to come up with a way to minimize the risk. Other things might involve multiple resources, multiple departments, and so on and so forth for dealing with this. So risk is all around us. And hopefully you guys have experience in this in your own personal lives. How would you address certain risks? I mean, it's risky just getting up in the morning. I mean, you could slip and fall when you get out of bed, or you could try to get out of bed and your blankets are all around you and you roll out of bed and you hit the floor. I mean, that's a risk that we all face getting out of bed. What do we do if that happens? Well, we remove the blankets, and if it does happen, we just say, "Wow, that's it. That was funny," and get up and go about our day. Or, what do we do? So, we got to come up with plans to address these risks. But like I said, not all risks need our planning to be done. That's where our risk tolerance comes in. But it doesn't hurt. If you're on the fence about making a plan or not, go ahead and make that plan. That way, it's better to have it than need it and not have one. All right. Oops. Okay. Contracting and procurement. So, contracts are, something that's essential in everyday life here in the United States, basically, between individuals and other individuals, or individuals and companies, company and company, or government agencies. There's contracts all the time. So if you're looking to purchase a house, the listing has a listing price or an asking price. So the seller has said, this house is worth $150,000. That's my initial offer. So if you look at the slide, what is a contract? We have an offer and a counter offer. But, you're a savvy home buyer. You're not going to pay sticker price or asking price. So you're going to say, okay, well, you want 150. I've done my own evaluation of it. I don't think it's worth more than 120,000. And you would go back and forth through your agents or, whoever you have representing you. And sooner or later, you're going to come to a number. Let's say it's 140, just picking a number. So you both accept 140. So we have the offer, counter offer, and then acceptance. Now, of course, the deal might have fell through. There might not have been the acceptance. And then that's it. You move on. Or you come back with another offer. But we have the acceptance, $140,000 for the house. But there's this consideration here. So consideration is anything of value. So I'm offering $140,000 for that house. So my consideration in this deal is $140,000. Your consideration would be the house, or the seller would be offering the house as consideration. So both sides are basically contributing something to this deal. Now, there might be some other stipulations, like, okay, well, I'll pay $140,000, but you need to pay for this inspection, plus a home warranty, and whatever else you come up with. Real estate agents will lead you down the right path on that because that's their job. That's what they do. So we have that consideration. The item of value. So you could have offered $130,000 and a car for a house. I mean, it doesn't have to be cash. Cash is just usually the one thing that people consider as this consideration, a monetary value. All right. So, but then again, with a contract, we have to have the authority to enter into the contract. So, if you're buying a house and you're married, most of the time, the lawyer who's ever doing the closing wants both spouses to sign the paperwork, or make sure that if one spouse isn't there, that there's a power of attorney that allows, let's say, the other spouse or somebody else to sign on their behalf because of that power of attorney. But you have to have that authority to enter into the contract. So, for example, if I'm a business owner and I have an employee, I could give that employee authority to operate within a certain range. Like, let's say they're a buying agent for my company. I would give them the authority to buy stuff on the behalf of my company, and that would require my company to pay for whatever they bought. And on the other side, there would be a selling agent or a sales manager or sales representative who has authority to sell the goods of that other company. In supply chain, we have these people called maverick spenders. They're the ones who do not have authority but try to enter our company into agreements. So that's why this authority has importance. Another thing you can think of is the person of legal age to enter into this agreement. Now, this might vary from state to state or country to country, but in the United States, it's generally 18 years old, the age of majority. And it could be lower, it could be higher. I think in North Carolina, technically, you could get married at like 15 with parental permission. So the courts there, probably going back to the 1700s, have given the authority to individuals of that age to get married as long as their parents consent to the marriage. But is somebody that young in today's day and age really mentally ready to be a spouse, to take care of their family, and so on and so forth? So that authority can come from several different angles. But then again, we have this last thing here, legality. There are certain things you just cannot enter into a contract legally. For example, indentured servitude, slavery, other things like that. That is not a legal thing that people can enter into. And so, therefore, if a contract was created and signed and everything up until that point was valid, it's not a legal subject that a contract can be made for. So, therefore, the courts would not enforce the contract if it got to the courts. So, is a rental agreement legal? There might be something in there that makes it illegal. But usually in contracts, you see a clause in there usually called a severability clause or something like that, where if a court finds a certain section of the contract is illegal or improper or whatever the courts may deem, the rest of the contract is still valid and enforceable. So there might be something like payment terms might be unenforceable. Or so many different things with contracts. That would be a whole law class about contracts. But the contract has to have a legal subject matter. So, for example, another one here, medical marijuana. Well, marijuana is still a controlled substance by the federal government. So, technically, if a federal court was hearing a conflict between two parties that covered that subject matter, the court would deem that contract invalid because it is not a legal contract in the eyes of the federal government. The states might have legalized it, but the federal government still calls it illegal. I believe it's a Schedule 2 or Schedule 1 marijuana is. Anyway, it's just illegal in any quantities by the federal government. So that's why most of these dispensaries and things like that can't use federally insured banks, because the federal government or the federal government will not insure the bank if the bank allows the illegal activity to be going through their bank. So that's contracts in a nutshell. Like I said, we can spend a whole entire class on contracts. But principal versus agent status. So I own 3 companies, and I am the principal, meaning I am the owner or the highest authority in my company. So I can delegate authority to an agent, but an agent can't delegate authority beyond them. So I can act on behalf of my company because it's my company. I can do whatever I want. I can close the doors tomorrow, or I can shut down and use all the money for the lottery. It doesn't matter. I can do what I want with my company. An agent can only act on behalf of the company within a certain boundary. Now, depending on where you're at, you might have what's called a warrant. In the federal government, they give people warrants saying that this is your authority, especially when it comes to contracts. The contracting office has warrants issued to the individuals for the federal government to buy items through that individual. or that individual to buy items from other companies on behalf of the federal government. So, but we have different contracts that we would use in project management. We're probably all used to the fixed price. Let's say a rental agreement. You're going to pay $1,000 a month per month for the life of this 1 year agreement, a contract. There you go, fixed price. You might be looking at you're getting oil change for your car. You go in there. There's a fixed price for all the services they provide. At the end, you usually sign something, and it's like a contract that they agreed to provide these services for this amount of money, and you agreed to pay that amount of money. And also, you hold them harmless for anything they might have done to your vehicle. So we're very familiar with fixed price. So I won't go any further with that one. But next, we go on to cost reimbursable. So if you ever hire, let's say, a professional, they usually have, let's say, an hourly rate plus materials. So you're reimbursing them for materials, but they're also getting, I'm sorry, wow, I jumped ahead to time and materials. But cost reimbursable is usually you're paying for the reimbursing their cost, basically. So this is, think of service contracts or something. The company might have to hire out to get a service technician to you, so they have that cost, and you're to reimburse them. Usually there's a percentage on top of that they put on it, so it might be cost reimbursable plus 10%, 5%, whatever. So you're reimbursing them for what they're spending. And then we have time and materials, and you can look at the trades, electricians, plumbers. You're paying an hourly rate plus the materials that they're using. Now, sometimes they have fixed prices. Let's say you need a new toilet. Well, they might say, okay, I can do a new toilet completely for $300. And if it takes them 6 hours to do a new toilet, it's $300. If it took them an hour, it's $300. So, but in the end, you got a new toilet. So, time and materials is common also. But not everybody has much experience with that. So, and there's many other contract types. Our book goes into more. And then we finally have this centralized versus decentralized. So if you think of, let's say, WVU Medicine, they have a centralized supply warehouse, or at least they were planning on centralizing at least 2 years ago, because I helped them out a little bit with that. But centralizing the warehouse into one location, and then that one location would service all the various WVU Medicine facilities. But before that, they had decentralized, where they had little supply warehouses in various locations without really a head office. So you get a lot of duplication of effort. You usually are spending more on inventory with the decentralized. The centralized, you are using usually less manpower or labor. You're usually using less for your other overhead expenses, because let's say a centralized warehouse or a centralized administrative office, or everybody's working out of one office. So you have the team you need there instead of having to have multiple people at the various locations. So depending on the structure and how far apart your locations are, is whether you're going to do centralized or decentralized, or maybe even go with a hybrid combination. So decentralized is really good at knowing what their local environment is, because let's say Charleston, I believe there's a health science campus down there. Charleston is different than Morgantown. The local community is different. And making those connections in the local community could mean better pricing for, let's say, health sciences campus down there. Where here in Morgantown, we could do a centralized because of all the facilities that are very close to Ruby Memorial Hospital. So we can combine our efforts in this area, but in a case-by-case basis, decentralize a little bit. That's kind of going into the hybrid model, where you're using the best of both. So one thing I would recommend as a project manager is understand your authority to enter into any type of contract. Sometimes you don't have the authority. You have to give it over to your procurement team. Then they might not be part of your project. So they don't understand your needs as well as somebody who might be working in your project. Because, they don't work for you. You're just another piece of paper or another thing in the queue for them to work on. So we want to make sure that we understand our authority when it comes to this kind of stuff. And if we don't have the authority, we might need to specifically ask for it and get it in writing. Because if something comes back, you can just say, hey, you put it in writing, you got to take care of this. Because I know many people who have not had it in writing and they were fine, but it still was a headache for them to get through that. So contracting and procurement. Procurement, just getting everything you need that's, not, let's say, manpower. Well, you technically could get manpower through procurement too. All right, let's move on to Chapter 11, Project Closeout. This is the time where what you do really, really matters. Projects need to be closed properly. It's not just you turn off the light and you go home and you never speak of the project again. Usually there's kind of like an after action or a meeting where you talk about what went well, what went bad, what could be done better, how did we deal with this, and how do we, kind of just talking about the good and the bad and how things went. It kind of analyzing after the fact. We need to put all that in writing because maybe the next project needs that information so they can avoid running into the same problems you did. So kind of building off the contracts, we need to close those out properly. Make sure they're paid. Make sure they've been completed in full. Make sure that there's nothing left hanging out there. For example, my building, Reynolds Hall, the new building that took the place of Stansbury Hall, there's some things that still need to be fixed in there. So technically the general contractor hasn't been released from servicing the building because there's some stuff that's just not finished. But they have a giant list of things that still need to be finished, and it's slowly getting smaller. But you have to keep on it. And then, of course, your team members need to have closure. This could be just like a pizza party or a celebration. I mean, you can go out for drinks, whatever the case that your team would find as, kind of like letting off steam from the entire project. But it goes beyond just, celebrating the project completion. You may need to do performance reviews of your people before they go back to their department. You might need to do handoffs, or make sure the person gets a bonus that you told everybody was going to get bonuses, and making sure they get the bonus or award or recognition that they deserve. There's a lot of things that you have to do to close it out when it comes to people. Of course, make sure resources are returned to where they belong. Like if you had equipment for your project, make sure it gets returned to the warehouse, supply warehouse, or wherever the equipment came from. Return it to whoever the caretaker is of that equipment. Make sure there's, the dot the I's, cross the T's on everything. So you might need to keep a running tally of where things came from, when they're getting returned to, and stuff has probably gone missing. It always happens on a project. Stuff goes missing, especially the long projects. You might have had equipment you didn't even know you had that, at the end that you checked out, let's say in the beginning of the project, that was 3 years ago. Well, 3 years later, they're looking for the equipment, but you have no idea where it went. It'll probably get found sooner or later, but need to figure it out, because maybe that needs to be replaced and billed to the project budget. You know, we have to be good stewards of everything and make sure it all goes back to where it belongs. So yeah, and it's always nice to return money to management if there's any money to return to them, because they like to have that money for, let's say, a next project or something that they need funding for. So yeah, closing out a project is easy, but it's tedious because of all this. And it's your responsibility as a project manager. You can delegate certain areas out, but you are ultimately responsible for the project closeout. All right, so the third paper, which I hope you guys are already working on, how can you use schedule optimization with constraints to improve patient outcomes? Wow, I just said that horribly. How can schedule optimization with constraints improve patient outcomes? I threw some words in there. Well, schedule optimization is just what it says on the screen here. The process of making sure each individual task or action in a schedule is aligned with your ultimate goal. So, for example, if you are a provider that sees patients, usually, I just took my son to the doctor today, so we were called from the waiting room. A weight was obtained, a height, blood pressure. They got a pulse oximeter, temperature. They got these vital signs, and we went to the room for a pulmonary appointment that was a follow-up. All we were looking for is, can we reduce the amount my son uses an inhaler? Was his weight and height necessary for this appointment? I have no idea. I'm not a medical provider. It might have been, or it's just a standard practice that a nurse does. The nurse was very pleasant. My son, being 3 years old, had no problems with anything, although he didn't like the blood pressure cuff, since they actually did the cuff on his arm. But beyond that, was that process optimized to get my son in, see the provider, and out? So, but we do have these limitations or constraints. There might be some type of policy within the facility that says, always get vital signs every visit. Okay. But, what are the limitations and restrictions? Limitation, let's say, the number of available rooms that this provider sees patients in. Some restrictions, maybe, back when COVID first started, they were doing like half their normal patient load, right when COVID first started. So, and then basically they stood 10 feet away, or as far as they could from the patients when COVID kicked off. So we do have all these constraints in our process. But schedule optimization, there might be limitations or restrictions that we're just not aware of. So I want you guys to take a look at a paper from that point of view. And, when we're looking at schedule optimization, it doesn't really matter if it's a general practitioner's office or surgery suite. It doesn't matter what area you guys want to go, but look at it from improving patient outcomes. So hopefully that will point you guys in the right direction. And you guys can always shoot me an email if needed. And if there's anything I can do, we're already 5 weeks in. We only have a couple weeks left, and you guys are doing awesome. Much better than last year. So good for you guys. And I hope you guys have a great week. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. All right. Thanks.